Main event of the evening.
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today we are discussing Season 7, Episode 12, The Mechanic.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in The Mechanic.
We open at Bronco's garage, where Chachi is trying to convince Fonzie to get more help around the garage so he doesn't overwork himself. He's been working 18 hours straight, and Chachi can't work full-time because he has school.
I put an ad in the paper. What am I going to do? Read it to the people personally?
After realizing he didn't give a car the lube job he was supposed to, Fonzie accepts that Chachi is right. There's a sentence you never want to hear. At Arnold's, Fonzie joins Richie, Ralph, and Potsy and picks up his lunch.
Things still kind of tough down at the garage, Fonz?
Bitch, I am in the brink of frazzles.
The phone rings for Fonzie. It's his new potential employee.
You calling about the job? Yeah, you know where Bronco's garage is? 1 hour. Be there.
Back at the garage, Chachi asks Fonzie for the day off so he can do his homework, which Fonzie grants. After he leaves, Don, a man in a wheelchair, arrives, and upon seeing Fonzie's look of surprise, comments,
"Oh, don't worry, it's not contagious."
Yeah, right, yeah.
Fonzie seems uncomfortable with the idea of hiring a wheelchair user, which Don picks up on. Fonzie says he can start next week, but Don insists he can start now.
All right, you got the job?
Where do you want me to start?
How about the workbench over there?
3 nights later at the Cunningham house, dinner is half an hour late. Due to Marion's latest play with her troupe, an all-female version of Little Men, Joni is making dinner tonight.
Dinner's ready. Oh,
that looks good, Joni.
As Joni serves dinner, Fonzie complains that his new employee is driving him nuts with the chip on his shoulder. Fonzie doesn't want to fire him like Howard suggests, so Richie tries to get Fonzie to roleplay firing Don with him,
Don, get over here. It's not working out. You're fired.
which Fonzie is not into. Fonzie says Don is in a wheelchair, and Richie blurts out Fonzie can't fire a man in a wheelchair. Howard asks if Fonzie would fire Don if he wasn't in a wheelchair, and Fonzie says he doesn't know. Also, Fonzie is letting Don come over to give Richie a haircut, which he learned to do in hospital as therapy.
For a second there, I thought you said he was going to give me a... Fonz, I just had a haircut.
As Don cuts Richie's hair, he's rude and dismissive to the Cunninghams.
Don't take too much off on the sides, all right?
You told me that 5 times already. I'm in a wheelchair, but I'm not deaf.
When Joni asks how long he's been using a chair, Don snaps that most people don't care. Fonzie, who has been mostly passive-aggressive until now, says it's one thing to be rotten to him, and another thing entirely to be rotten to the Cunninghams. Don explains that one day, he stopped at a red light, and a drunk driver didn't.
Oh, don't look so sad. The insurance took care of everything, except me walking again.
Then he angrily leaves. The next day at the garage, Don hasn't shown up for work. On the bright side, Chachi got a B+ on his homework.
You got a B+. Look at that B+. You didn't put this on here yourself? No.
Richie also stops by, and Fonzie reveals Don quit because Fonzie found out he used to be a mechanic, not just an assistant.
Did you know that he had a shop before the accident?
And Fonzie told him he should be a mechanic. Fonzie tells Richie to go find Don, even though he has no idea where Don lives, because he's an honor student.
Richie, you're an honor student. You will think of something.
Yeah.
Unexpectedly, Richie does find Don and brings him back to the garage. Fonzie apologizes as best he can, but Don calls the garage a dump.
what a dump.
Since Fonzie can't hit a guy in a wheelchair, he pulls another old wheelchair out of his office, so he and Don will be on an even field.
We're even Steve, all right? We're even Steve.
It's not much of a fight, more of an awkward chase, and Fonzie ends up locking himself in the office as Don storms off. The next night over dinner, Howard tells Fonzie he did the best he could. Don shows up again, saying he came to talk.
All right, let's try it again. Let's go outside.
Now sit down.
Don has realized, since coming to Milwaukee, he's been difficult.
If a patient gets difficult, you clone him.
Fonzie insists that he, Fonzie, did nothing wrong, and did everything he could. Don admits he realized Fonzie actually cared when he pulled that dumb wheelchair stunt, and he's gotten something he hasn't gotten since getting out of the hospital.
Home cooking?
No, honesty. From the very beginning, you treated me like I was anybody else.
Fonzie says he would have let Don be a mechanic if he knew he had been a mechanic. Don's about to leave, when he and Fonzie start talking about a car giving Fonzie trouble, and they head down to the garage to look at it. The next day, Don has just finished beating Richie at basketball.
Well, I wasn't expecting those 24-foot hook shots.
When Howard runs downstairs, happily reporting that he lost 3 pounds and is now off his diet.
No more grapefruit. From now on, I eat.
Thank you, Peter. That was The Mechanic. It first aired back on December 4th, 1979. Happy Days was followed by a new Angie, in which Angie throws a wedding party for her friend Mary Mary.
Mary, Mary, why you bugging?
Despite the fact that Mary Mary has only known this man for 6 weeks. NBC had a new episode of The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo, in which a senator dies on election day and an unscrupulous campaign manager tries to keep his death a secret.
It's a weekend at Bernie situation.
And CBS had a new California Fever, in which Rick decides to sell the local teen hangout, Rick's Place, and get a regular job. But he soon finds that punching a time clock is not for him.
'Tis not for me.
So, Peter, of those 3 choices, what are you watching?
Oh, of course, I'm obviously watching Angie.
You want to see Mary Mary?
Yes, I do. I would like to know what exactly a person with the name Mary Mary is like.
You know what the name of that episode is?
What?
Mary Mary Marys.
Of course. It would have to be.
I'm probably leaning towards Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo because it sounds like some Weekend at Bernie's style shenanigans, which I'm always up for. So I'm probably watching that. The Mechanic was directed by Jerry Paris, and it was written by our pal, Fred Fox Jr. The most recent of Fred's episodes that we covered was Shotgun Wedding Part 1. As for guest stars this week, we only have one. It's Jim Knob as Don Koenig. Jim is an athlete from Long Beach who was a track and field competitor in college. In 1976, he made it to the semifinals in pole vaulting at the Olympic trials.
When Knob was 22 years old, he was a pole vaulter in Long Beach, California, with his sights set on the 1980 Olympic Games.
Life was a runway, a box, and a bar.
How high can I go?
In 1978, he was hit by a car while on his motorcycle and was paralyzed from the waist down. After that, he became one of America's most prominent wheelchair athletes, competing successfully in marathons and garnering lots of press coverage.
Jim Knob is a consummate athlete. He was a world-class pole vaulter, a cross-country runner, and now one of America's premier marathoners. He has been, ever since a car left him paralyzed 3.5 years ago.
He's retired now, but he continues to be an activist. He's currently trying to raise money to clean up California's Pacific Coast Highway. Jim also did some acting from the late 70s to the mid-80s. Besides this episode of Happy Days, he was on MASH, The Love Boat, Alice, The A-Team, The Fall Guy, Airwolf, and Here's Boomer, as well as the 1983 Burt Reynolds movie, The Man Who Loved Women.
A simple love story about one man's pursuit of a meaningful relationship with half the human race.
Hi, I'm Sue, the babysitter.
The Man Who Loved Women.
So, Peter, what did you think of Jim Knob as Don Koenig?
I think that he's kind of let down by the writing because it feels like for most of this episode, his character is mostly just defined as being really unpleasant and angry. But also at the same time, he has a right to be angry. In his introductory scene with Fonzie, Fonzie is very clearly uncomfortable with him. And he's trying to say, well, I can't hire you because of reasons that I'm not going to go into. And yeah, it's pretty obvious that he is uncomfortable with the idea of hiring a wheelchair user, which I guess feels kind of weird with what happens later when Don says that Fonzie treated him like anyone else because, well, he didn't, apparently, at first. That being said, I do think that Jim did a good job with the role, and I do like that they hired an actual wheelchair user to play this character.
I would agree with that. I thought it was a bold move that Don is written as so hostile and unpleasant from the beginning.
Yeah, because a lot of the times when shows will do episodes like this, very special episodes where they'll introduce a character who's disabled or something else, they'll be super saintly and they'll exist to teach the able characters a lesson about prejudice or something. And here, no, he's justifiably angry to an extent and unjustifiably angry to another extent.
I thought Jim played that pretty well. I had a very surreal experience. After I screened this episode for this podcast, I turned on the TV and Jim was also on The Love Boat.
Oh my God.
It's everywhere! It's everywhere!
Jim's career as a wheelchair athlete in the 1980s got so much press coverage, I would advise people to check it out. He was the bad boy of wheelchair athletes in the 80s. He was supposed to be the in-your-face wheelchair athlete.
The hair on the back of your neck stands up a little bit, and it's wild. Coasting and attaining top speed and achieving an aerodynamic position is an art all in itself. It's something completely separate from the fitness of our sport.
As for songs this week, Tossin' and Turnin' is performed by Anson Williams.
'Cause I was tossing and turning, turning and tossing, tossing and turning all night.
This was a huge hit for Bobby Lewis in 1961. Billboard declared it the #1 single of the year. It seems like we're getting a lot of Anson performances lately. What do you think?
We really are. Spoiler alert, but this is the last season where Ron Howard and Don Most will be regulars. They're going to leave to pursue other career opportunities, and I suspect that something similar is happening with Anson Williams. He's going to stick around for the rest of the show, but I suspect that maybe he's asking the producers to do him a solid and help him try to get his singing career off the ground.
I thought he did a nice job with Tossin' and Turnin', so I don't mind it. I like Anson's performances on the show.
Yeah, it's a fine song.
We also hear Poison Ivy by the Coasters. They've been using that one a lot. As for cultural and historical references, Ralph compares Potsy to Tony Bennett.
I thought you were great tonight. I could have sworn Tony Bennett was singing.
Anthony Dominic Benedetto is a jazz singer from Queens who became a popular crooner in the 1950s with such hits as Rags to Riches and Stranger in Paradise. He recorded his signature song, I Left My Heart in San Francisco, in 1962. His career lasted until his retirement just this year. Marion says she's going to do an all-female version of Little Men.
We're going to do an all-female version of Little Men.
Presumably, this is an adaptation of Louisa May Alcott's 1871 novel, a sequel to Little Women. In the novel, Jo and her husband run a boarding school called Plumfield, which becomes a home to 2 poor orphans. The novel has been adapted to film at least 3 times.
For those who love the classic Little Women, comes Louisa May Alcott's Little Men. It was a time of great hardship.
May I ask what you'll be doing with the boy?
Leave him at the Wayward House with the rest of the street urchins.
So someone must have done a play of it somewhere. I couldn't find any theatrical productions of Little Men. There are plays of Little Women, aren't there?
Yeah, there are. And I think at least one stage musical.
Howard is on the grapefruit diet this week.
Grapefruit diet. Throw out the pizza and beer. Grapefruit diet. I'll get those jelly donuts out of here.
This is a fad diet that goes back to the 1930s. Generally, it calls for eating grapefruit before meals, along with foods that are rich in fat and proteins. The version on Happy Days seems to consist of just having the grapefruit.
Which sounds like some version of hell. You can only eat grapefruit. Even if you like grapefruit, if you only have to eat grapefruit, you will eventually have a complete mental breakdown.
Fonzie utters one of his trademark malapropisms, Saravoyant.
Why don't you just speak up and tell me that you were a mechanic? I'm not a Saravoyant.
He probably means clairvoyant, a word that comes from the French for clear vision. It refers to someone who claims to have extrasensory perception.
Sword of Omens, give me sight beyond sight.
And at the end of the episode, Richie and Don play a game called Horse.
That was a pretty close game of horse.
What are you talking about close? You had enough horses in there to start a rodeo.
This is a basketball game for 2 people. The way the game is played is that one person makes a shot and the opponent has to duplicate that shot. If the shot cannot be duplicated, that person receives the letter H. A second missed shot earns an O, and so on. The game continues until one of the players has spelled horse. Other observations. Ralph says he worked for Fonzie, quote-unquote, last year.
Well, could I help you out, Fonz?
I love your left. Don't help me, right?
Why not? Fonz, I worked for you last year and I stayed out of your way.
Sure, you got your pants caught in a fan belt.
Is he referring to the motorcycle from season 3?
Possibly. Ralph hasn't really worked for Fonzie at all because Ralph is not very competent. So yeah, it probably would have had to be the motorcycle. Although I am pretty sure that took place more than a year ago, like at least 2 years, but continuity is not Happy Days' strong suit.
It never has been. Richie's Fonzie impression has improved.
Whoa.
Or it's gotten more subtle. What did you think of his Fonzie impression?
Much improved. It does not feel like a cartoon character anymore, or like he was making fun of Fonzie.
Yeah, I thought that was a good little acting bit on Ron Howard's part. Chachi skips again this week, just as he did at the end of Chachi Sells His Soul.
That makes me feel grown up. Yeah. See you, Fonz.
Hey, how's it going? Skipping. Crazy kid.
I think the show is trying to turn this into a running joke, and I would ask them to please not do that. At the end of Chachi Sells His Soul, to show that he no longer wants to be a grown-up, which was his fondest wish in the episode, he skips out of the room at the end of the episode.
Yeah, and in this episode, after he tells Fonzie that he's too grown up for ice cream, Fonzie suggests he go get sherbet instead to celebrate his good grade, and he skips out. The joke is that he's not as mature as he thinks he is. It's very weird to see Scott Baio skipping. At this point, he is too old to skip.
I think pretty much everybody is too old to skip. It is just not a pleasant thing to see people skipping. And the wheelchair duel looks like it could have been fun, but Happy Days ends it before it even starts. This is kind of a pattern with Happy Days. In the Fonzie versus the She-Devils episode, we are set up for a physical fight between Richie and his friends and the She-Devils. and then that doesn't happen.
Well, there was no way that Richie and his friends would have won that.
No, but it would have been entertaining to watch.
That is true. That is very true.
And then there is an episode where Fonzie gets back together with his old gang, the Falcons, and they are about to have a full-on gang war. And then it's resolved by the two gangs having a softball game. That really felt like a disappointment. I was like, oh, they're setting up this huge gang fight between Fonzie's gang and a rival gang, and then it doesn't happen.
Joni's weird boyfriend had a pretty fun actual fight scene.
Yeah, it does. Maybe that one was so difficult to shoot that they decided, well, we're never going to have a real fight again. We're just going to have fights that almost happen. So, Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions this week?
No, not really. This was a pretty low-key episode, sartorially speaking.
So, Peter, I will ask that age-old, timeless question. Was this episode any good?
There is a tendency for able people to treat disabled people either like their disability is something that is just so difficult and so hard to overcome, and they're so brave for doing it. And then alternatively, you have able people telling disabled people, hey, just get over it. You can live with this. And both of those can be frustrating and annoying. And I think that this episode kind of falls into the latter. On the one hand, it is nice that this episode doesn't fall into the saintly disabled person teaching able people a lesson trap, but it kind of feels like it goes the other way, where the disabled person has to learn from the able people to be more nice about his disability. I'm not sure how to feel about that.
I'm not really sure the message this episode is trying to send. You called this a very special episode, which it very much is. Funny or Die has a whole series on YouTube called A Very Special Episode about shows like this. And one feature that you'll see in a lot of those is that the character who's brought in to demonstrate something or to possess some characteristic is then never heard from again on the show.
He's an alcoholic, and he needs help, and he's ready to get his life back on track. Only he doesn't, because we never see Uncle Ned ever again, because he probably family tied a rope around his neck.
And that's very much true with Don. Don just disappears after this week. He's never heard from again.
Which way did he go? Which way did he go?
What happened to him? Did he become a mechanic and maybe get his own place in another town? They could have at least said something, but he's this person who comes in, teaches us all a lesson, I guess, about not being bitter about being in a wheelchair or how to treat people in wheelchairs, and then he just disappears with no explanation. At least the show Alf, when Alf befriends a blind woman who doesn't know that he's an alien.
Oh my God.
That blind woman actually becomes a semi-regular character on Alf, and she makes multiple subsequent appearances.
Huh, that's kind of nice. Good for you, Alf.
Yeah, so if they're going to do this kind of thing, they should kind of commit to it. But I guess it's harmless. That's the best thing I can say about The Mechanic, is that it's a harmless episode. It's not really one that I remember a lot when I think of Happy Days, or when I even think of this season of Happy Days. Even though this is a very special episode, it's not really that special of an episode. It's just kind of another half hour of TV that they cranked out.
It could have been worse.
Yes. And by the way, some people say that the title of this episode is a reference to the Charles Bronson movie, The Mechanic.
The Mechanic is a non-stop thrill ride. Charles Bronson. Jan Michael Vincent. The Mechanic.
How long till she goes?
Just about now.
I didn't mention that in my cultural and historical references section because I don't really see any connection to the Charles Bronson movie at all. It's just called The Mechanic because it's about a mechanic.
It's tenuous.
With an episode like They Shoot Fonzies, Don't They? That actually does have connections to They Shoot Horses, Don't They? So that merited a mention. But this Charles Bronson thing, I don't see it. So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow us on Twitter at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Twitter at Peter Volfranc. That's PeterVulfranc.
And they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysare.libsyn.com. And they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysarepodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week, Richie and the gang band together to save their makeout spot in their closing inspiration point.
Sounds like a very dramatic episode indeed. So see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
There's a little wheel a-turning in my heart. There's a little wheel a-turning in my heart. In my heart, in my heart. There's a little wheel a-turning in my heart.
Yeah, right, yeah.